Penguin Random House Audio presents The Red Balcony by Jonathan Wilson. Read for you by Peter Noble. For Sharon, and to the memory of my brother, Geoffrey. To understand historical reality, it is sometimes necessary not to know the outcome. Pierre Vidal-Naquet. 1. Jerusalem, March 1933. Kola, the receptionist, eyed the large brown paper package, stamped, postmarked and tied up with string, that sat on the front desk between his silver bell and a diminished pile of the local German-language newspaper, the Mitteilungsblatt. He shifted it to the side in order to make room for 2 additional sets of newspapers, popular items for guests on their way into breakfast, even though the news they carried was always a week old. He had no interest in the bland front page of the London Times, but a photograph of a thin-faced figure with his hair swept back and its accompanying headline in the Frankfurter Zeitung briefly caught his attention. Josef Goebbels had been appointed Minister of Information and Propaganda in Hitler's new government. He switched on the overhead fan, and a wisp of smoke fell from the gears. Early morning light filtered through shade and touched the brown and mahogany furniture in the lobby, spinning dust motes off its armchairs. Kola opened the blinds, returned to his desk, caught the sleeve of his jacket in his hand and ran it across the polished wood to accomplish an extra shine. The newly admitted light spilled through the front windows and cut sharp white diagonals onto the wall behind him. Kola banged his hand on the bell, and the 2 Arab boys, Ahmed and Ibrahim, who acted as weekday porters, clattered upstairs from the basement and appeared in the lobby. They looked around in vain for guests to assist and luggage to transport. "Here," Kola said, handing over the package. "Take it up." He muttered some instructions to the boys, and then they were gone. Easter was a month away. The great rush of pilgrims, mostly German, some British, was yet to arrive. Soon they would swell the congregation in the Church of the Redeemer, crowd the Via Dolorosa, and fill the Hotel fast to capacity. Kola, as Elrich the manager had requested, was doing what he could to ensure that these tourists of the Holy Spirit received a rousing and congenial welcome upon their arrival. The boys stood behind a balustrade that topped the ornate stone parapet on the 2nd floor. Together they lowered the banner attached to the flagpole, removed the old flag, and replaced it with the new. A stiff breeze blew in from the desert to the south. The sky, shot through now with blue morning light, shimmered over the walls of the old city. From their vantage point, the boys could take in the distant bustle of activity around both the Damascus and Jaffa gates. They winched the flagpole back into place. Kola stepped out of the hotel and crossed the cobblestone street, shooing a mongrel dog from his path. There was the Union Jack. And now, hanging alongside it, was the new German flag, with its striking black swastika snapping in the March wind, high above a broad swath of the streets of Jerusalem. Kola observed it with pride. Perhaps, he thought, it might even be visible from his own home, where it sat tucked in among a row of stone houses that his grandfather, Stefan, a dutifully committed Templar from Ludwigsburg, had helped to build on the Street of Ghosts. 2 British soldiers in steel helmets, rifles in hand, approached on Kola's side of the street. He had an impulse to stop them and point out the new flag, but he held back, and they passed by without looking up. 2. June. Arlosoroff came out of the Jewish Agency building on King George Street, slumped into the back of the car, and laid his briefcase on the seat next to him. He was exhausted. He brushed a thin layer of dust from the sleeves of his suit jacket, imagining that the grime of Europe was still on him, staining his shirt cuffs. After Berlin, after the train south and the nauseating boat trip from Italy to Egypt, he'd had only 1 day of rest in which to recover his equilibrium. Then it was back on the train, this time from Cairo to Tel Aviv, and finally home to the pure joy of embracing Sima and hugging his baby son. He had one warm, fragrant June night in his own bed, the sea lapping into his dreams, and the following morning he was on the last leg of his journey up to Jerusalem to present the fruits of his labor, the putative terms of the transfer agreement he had negotiated with Hitler's new government, the economic equations, his own dismal science at its most dismal. He tried to view the situation in its essence, simplified. What the Nazis wanted, an end to the international boycott of German goods, precipitated by their brutal treatment of Jews, which was visible to anyone who walked the streets of German cities. The beatings, arrests, exclusions, disbarments, dismissals. What Jewish Palestine wanted, exit visas for those persecuted German Jews. And if the Nazis wouldn't let them take their money out, which they wouldn't, then Arlosoroff wanted, at the very least, a deal to allow 50,000 Jewish migrants to use their funds to purchase German goods for export to Palestine. He saw 2 side effects. One that could only be whispered was the invigoration of the Jewish economy in Palestine, with German instruments and equipment in the factories, German machines on the farms. And one that couldn't be spoken of at all. A boost for the German economy, with all that implied in a country committed to a vast military build-up. It was an ugly, unsavory deal, but how else could the Jews purchase their freedom to leave? And of course the British, rulers and governors of this thin strip of land, they too must be brought on board, appeased and paid, a £1,000 entry fee for every Jew coming in. Where, he wondered, would that money come from? A detail yet to be worked out. In Jerusalem, he outlined everything to the other members of the agency's executive committee, plumbed the depths of the moral quandary of dealing with the German government at all, threw darts of clarity through the blue smoke of cheap cigarettes, traced the degree of progress and possibility that he had discussed in Germany. In the end, he took a sip of water, looked around the table, noted the concern etched in every face, and offered the soft landing of his conclusion. News of a village in Palestine that would become a major center for transferred German Jewish youth once the agreement was complete. This, he proudly affirmed, had been the positive content of his lunchtime discussion with Sir Douglas Wharton, the British High Commissioner. He briefly closed his eyes, opened them to find the driver staring at him in the mirror. Was it a hostile look? Maybe. An hour and a half and he would be back once more in Tel Aviv. He'd told Sima that he'd meet her at 5:15 p.m. A walk, and then an early Sabbath dinner at the Kayete Dan boarding house. The driver turned the key in the ignition. Arlosoroff rolled down one of the rear windows, and before long, the car began its serpentine descent out of Jerusalem, past terraces of gnarled olive trees clambering upward from the sun-baked earth. He took out a clean white handkerchief, removed his glasses to clean the lenses. In Berlin, on the Kurfürstendamm, he had walked past overflowing flower stalls, and a woman with bright red cheeks had offered him a huge bunch of fragrant blue violets. When he had shaken his head no, she had proffered instead a bunch of honey-coloured daffodils. If Sima had been with him, he would have bought it for her. But of course she couldn't be. And a good thing, too. Prague, Warsaw, London, Berlin, meeting after meeting, the untethered urgency of it all. In Germany, Hitler's brown shirts beat.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?